Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 696, and today's date is June 19th, 2015, and the title of this episode is Greece Takes Another Step to Become an Equal Member of the BRICS. Now, before I get started, I just want to let everyone know that interview with Joe Quinn is now uploaded to the X22 Report Spotlight channel, and you can go right to YouTube, type in X22 Report Spotlight, or you can come to the x22report.com site. You will see the video on the right-hand side. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand and we see the situation in Greece really ramping up. We see the central bankers getting very nervous. We understand they're getting ready to make a move, just like Greece is making a move, calling the debt illegal, illegitimate, odious. And at this point in time, Greece has signed the Turkish Stream gas pipeline. So it did not go with the EU, the US pipeline. They definitely went with Russia. The deal was signed. It's a €2 billion deal. They're going to be working out the roadmap this Friday, and they're hoping to start construction by 2016, and they're hoping that it'll be completed by 2019. Now, Greece understands that this pipeline will bring in revenue. It will spur economic growth. It will help the country. This is why Greece is looking towards Russia and the BRIC nations, because they look at the EU, United States, government central bankers, and they see a system that is dying, a system that continually puts them into debt. And right now, the EU, the United States, is out there saying, you cannot make this type of deal. You need our approval from the EU. And Greece is coming back saying, absolutely not. Greece has the right to its own actions and its independent diversified energy policies. And this is coming from the energy minister in Greece saying that we don't need anyone else's approval. We can do what we want here. And this is exactly what they're doing. And the minister added that Greece is a diversified hub which could supply natural gas to all of the European countries that need it. And this is what they're hoping to do. Now, we understand that Russia invited Greece in May to become a member of the BRIC system. And we understand Greece, Russia, China, the BRIC nations might be talking secretly in back rooms where no one really understands what's going on, and because all they're hearing is that they're trying to make this deal with the EU. But we understand that certain things are happening in the background, and we're starting to see some indication that, yeah, they might be moving towards the BRIC system. Right now, they say, we are at the stage of a preliminary discussion to join the NDB of BRICS, so that Greece, as soon as the bank starts to operate, could become its equal member. It will be one of the first non-founder members. Discussions on the issue had been very positive, and the president of the NDB, Vaman Kamath, said that he would support a Greek decision to become a member of the bank when the country submitted its application. So we can see at this point in time that Greece and the central bankers, the private Western central bankers, cannot come to an agreement. We see that Greece has already signed the deal with Russia, and they're looking to submit an application with the BRICS. They're already in preliminary discussions. And what's very interesting about all of this, and we reported on this yesterday, is that the protests started in Greece, the pro-austerity protests. We want more debt. We want less jobs. I mean, just think about what they're protesting here. And then we come to find out from Greece's former representative to the IMF, when he was testifying in front of a special parliamentary committee on the Greek debt, said that several Greek journalists were trained in Washington, D.C. in order to support the position of the IMF and the European Commission in the Greek media. Parliament President and head of the committee noted that the committee investigated Greece's debt would seek to discover the names of the journalists that took part in Washington's training sessions. certain individuals who work for the mass media were contracted to conceal the fact that the Greek debt was completely sustainable, that they'd be able to do it. More debt is good. And when we continually look at this, and we made many, many examples to how debt cannot be sustained, we've been talking about how it can't be sustained. But of course, we see the protests out there right now saying we want more debt, we want more austerity, we want less jobs, because this is basically what they're saying. Put us out of work, give us more debt. And again, these protests make no sense. The reporters who were reporting and trained on this made no sense. And now it's all coming out that they were trained. Christine Lagarde and other high officials at the IMF contacted me before my testimony, before the committee, to remind them that the members of the IMF are immune from prosecution. They went on to say that several economists and university professors also attempted to convince the public that the debt was sustainable, adding that he puts them in the same category as the journalists. So this whole thing was completely planned. They brought in economists, they brought in journalists, they brought in university professors, almost like global warming, where they pay these people off, they train them to convince you that people are causing global warming. It's the same scam. There's no difference here. It's to meet a certain agenda. And I wouldn't be surprised at this point in time where the United States, the EU, the central banking system looks at Greece and says, okay, we've tried everything. We tried to bargain with them. We can't come up with an agreement. We started protests. We trained the Greek journalists, the economists, the university professors, and they're still going to leave the EU. They're still going to default. They're still going to move over to Russia and the BRICS system. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see some type of color revolution inside Greece to get rid of the current government, to bring in a puppet government. Now, will this happen? We don't know. But it seems like all indicators are pointing to this. And we'll have to watch this situation very, very carefully. Now, during this whole entire time, we see the Greek people, they know what's coming. They realize that this whole thing is completely falling apart. And the Greeks withdraw $1 billion from the banks in a single day. What does this tell you? This tells you they are nervous, they're afraid of a bank holiday. The same thing that happened in Cyprus. And now we're starting to get some information that the top 4 banks in Greece, one of them is the National Bank of Greece, the Alpha Bank, the Euro Bank, they hold about 91% of Greek banking assets. And they've already been bailed out twice. But there is a real possibility they'll fold. Not just Greece, but the entire banking system in Greece. And this is coming from Fitch Managing Director James Longston. And we're also getting information that there might be a bank holiday and the banks might not reopen on Monday. The banks would close down this weekend and they'll remain closed on Monday, maybe a couple days. Now, I don't know if it's going to happen this weekend. It might happen next weekend. And once they reopen, there will be strict capital controls which would prevent any of the other deposits leaving the bank. Now, we saw this in Cyprus where the people went to sleep on Friday. They woke up and all of a sudden they couldn't take their money out. And this went on for longer than a year. Their money was stuck in the bank and the banksters robbed them of their money. They took their money and they replaced it with worthless bank stock. Because the banks were failing, they had nothing to give them. So now they're stuck with worthless bank stocks in their accounts. And of course, what are you going to do with them? Nothing. And they ended up taking about 47% of their money. And we see the same thing is going to happen in Greece. And again, we realize that the EU, the United States, England, Canada, New Zealand, and many other countries have created these bail-in documents. Now, the bail-in documents alone, they don't just say, oh, here's the bail-in document and we can just close the banks. They use them to support their case. This is why they create them. So they can say, oh, we cannot be bailed out by the government. Our only alternative, and we have the documentation to prove it, we need to shut down the banks and go inward and take the people's money to keep the banks solvent. They produce the documents and they say, okay, everything is legal here. They can do this. And this is what we are seeing right now. Now, here in the United States, the economy is completely falling apart, declining. And we are seeing more and more signs that the economy cannot support itself anymore. These illusionary, fake, phony numbers that the government continually puts out, they don't even make sense anymore. Why are all these companies laying off all these people if the unemployment rate continually comes down? If they're telling us we're in a recovery, it makes no sense. Companies are coming out and saying they are losing revenue. We need to get rid of our staff. We see Hershey's now. They're going to be cutting 300 people because of lower revenue. And we see Caterpillar, which is doing absolutely awful. Now, you have to remember, back in 2008, going to about 2010, they had 19 months of negative sales. And then it was pumped back up. And the Fed created money. They got everyone to start building again, and people were leasing the equipment. And they pumped it up, and then we had a slow decline from about 2011 all the way up to 2013. And then since 2013, they have only had negative sales. 30 months of negative sales. They laid off tens of thousands of people. They've closed plants. It is not working. The entire private Western central bank system is falling apart. And a lot of their sales that has dropped quite a bit is in, of course, Asia, Latin America, and the United States. And we see Latin America is moving towards the BRICS system, towards Russia, going away from the U.S., Asia doing the same. And we see the entire system is completely crumbling under all of this. And it cannot be sustained. We see Egypt right now. They are considering an opportunity to borrow in rubles to pay for grain supplies. They're going to completely bypass the dollar. Egypt received offers from Russian grain exporters to use the rubles instead of dollars. And Egypt is looking at this saying, yeah, why not? Why don't we do this? We don't need the dollar for this. We're dealing with Russia. We have rubles. We might as well use them. And Egypt is the largest grain importer across the globe. The country annually imports about 4.5 million tons of grain from Russia, amounting to about $1.2 billion. And this is what we are seeing across the globe. We're seeing all of these countries dropping the dollar and using their own currencies for trade. They're using the yuan, the ruble, gold, silver. And this is continuing because they realize they don't need the dollar anymore. The dollar is on its last legs. The dollar is failing. The only thing that keeps this entire system going is the petrodollar. And we see that in the Middle East, the people are rising up in each one of these countries. They're taking back their countries. They want the central bank out, and they want to use other currencies than the dollar. And when this happens, there is no need for the dollar. And we're seeing this in Yemen, Libya, Lebanon, Iraq, and it is spreading across the globe. And it's getting worse. Now, of course, the United States government central bankers, they realize this. They understand that if this does happen, the entire system is going to completely fall apart. We'll have a major, major collapse. And this is why they've been trying to get into all these countries like Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina, of course, using coup d'etats to overthrow the elected government. They did this all throughout the Middle East. They want to get into Syria, Iran, because if they believe if they can get into more of these countries and put the dollar on oil and have people use the dollar to pay for the oil, everything will be okay. But it's not working out as planned. And things are really starting to accelerate, and things are failing right now. And when these countries completely take back their entire country, the people of the countries, and they kick out the puppet regimes, these dollars that no one is using anymore will come back to the United States. And we'll see an increase of dollars in the United States, which will devalue the dollar, which will then lead to inflation, because the value, when you have more dollars in circulation, the value of the dollar is deflated. And we see prices of goods go up because it takes more dollars to pay for these goods. And we are going to see this. And it's getting closer and closer. And of course, these central bankers are out there and the U.S. government is out there. Well, how can we bring in more revenue? Because all of this cannot be sustained. We have so much debt, but not enough revenue. Because again, all of these people that had high-paying jobs are now in part-time jobs. They're not bringing in the same revenue, so they can't pay the same taxes. And this is why they came up with FATCA, Obamacare. This is why they want a carbon tax. And we see Obamacare is completely failing at this time. Remember, there's 100 million plus people. I think it's 350 million people. And they only have, 6, 7, 8 million people. A lot of these people were already in the insurance arena. They already had policies. So it's not like they brought in tons of new people. And what we're seeing is that they can't bring the revenue in. And all these people who decided not to go with the insurance companies, they're paying a penalty, because as we know, this is all about taxes and benefiting the insurance companies, not the people of the U.S. But we're starting to see signs among the 22 Obamacare health insurance co-ops of imminent financial collapse that could leave more than 1 million Americans without coverage. And this is according to the Daily Caller News Foundation investigative group analysis. All but one of the federally funded co-ops are experiencing accelerated net losses. Many of the 22 co-ops could soon follow an Obamacare co-op that defaulted earlier this year, suffering $163 million in operating losses in a single year. That collapse left 120,000 customers without coverage on Christmas Eve. Insurance rating firm AM Best also warned in January that as of September 30th, 2014, the ratio of surplus notes outstanding to capital and surplus exceeded 100% for all of the co-ops. Some co-ops are taking steps to stem their large losses with huge new rate increases. The entire thing is falling apart because this was built on a system where it benefited the insurance companies, not the people. Basically, we have the same thing. We have the insurance companies giving us insurance, but their policies now are much, much worse. The deductibles are high, the benefits are low, and the premiums are high. They didn't give us anything we didn't have before. Actually, all they did was make it mandatory, add the penalty, and added additional taxes interwoven into the insurance. That's it. That's what they did. And now, instead of having competition between all the insurance companies, there is no competition because it's mandatory. They can charge whatever they want. And they're all in it together. They'll all benefit. Now, if this entire system comes down, don't worry. Obamacare has a back door for the insurance company. It's called a bailout, which they included in the legislation that the insurance companies wrote. So again, we didn't get anything. The people. This is why Congress and the president decided we aren't going to take this. We're going to exempt ourselves from it. And as time goes on, it's getting worse and worse because the people realize, first of all, I can't afford it. Secondly, I'm never going to use it unless something catastrophic happens. And this is what I had before. You're not giving me anything that's better. Now, there is a report coming out showing that all 50 U.S. states and the District of Columbia are failing to meet international standards for the use of lethal force by law enforcement. Now, we've seen police out there using a lot of force right off the bat. And they're dressed in fatigues, they have assault weapons, they're getting ready to wage war. And this is what we're seeing. And this report is coming from Amnesty International. It also found that 13 states have laws that don't comply with U.S. standards. The international standards found in the United Nations Code of Conduct for Law enforcement officials call for lethal force to be used only as a last resort. It's to protect officers from death or serious injury. However, not a single state in the entire U.S. has a law that supports such a notion. Now, I remember when I was growing up, and in my wife's family, there are police officers, and they were trained to use force as a last resort. You would never pull your weapon unless fired upon. Today, it's the opposite. Pull your weapon first and fire, ask questions later. And we see right now, coming from Amnesty International, police have a fundamental obligation to protect human life, said Steve Hawkins. Deadly force must be reserved as a method of absolute last resort. And I agree, but where are they getting their training? Why are they coming out and being so forceful with the people of their community? Because this is the training they are given right now to prepare for this major collapse, to keep order, to keep control for the government. This is why the government has been stepping in, giving them all of these weapons, giving them all of these military assets like tanks, fatigues, machine guns, surveillance equipment. This is why Obama right now wants to nationalize the police force. They're giving them grants so they report up to the chain to the federal government. This is all part of the plan. Now, out in Ukraine, we see that the Ukraine government has a huge debt payment to make on June 22nd. And of course, they created legislation saying that maybe we won't have to pay back Russia because, again, they owe Russia about $3 billion, and they have a payment coming up very, very soon of about $75 million. And right now, Ukraine says, yes, we will pay the $75 million, our payment. We're ready to do this, and we'll have to watch this as June 22nd approaches to see if they actually do make the payment, because they could invoke the legislation that says, this debt was created in a certain way and it's criminal, and Ukraine does not have to pay this, because this is what the bill says. We see the EU governments have extended for a year a ban on trade and investment with Crimea on Friday, meaning the European help for Russian Black Sea oil and gas exploration and visits by European cruise ships will remain outlawed. The measures were adopted following Russia's annexation of Crimea, and they don't recognize that Russia owns Crimea right now, and these new measures will extend until June 23rd, 2016. And the ban includes importing products made in Crimea into the EU. We see Ukraine, Yatsenyuk to be specific, is out there saying that we need a secure IT and mobile network. He is saying this because when they were fighting the southeastern people during one of the full-scale military conflicts, and of course they're saying it's with Russia, but it was really with these southeastern people, their communications were wide open. And this is the reason why they lost against the southeastern people, or they couldn't make any gains in the southeastern region. So today what they want to do is they want to create a new secure IT mobile network. And this is going to cost $1 billion US, and they want this up and running as soon as possible. And this way they can secure communications among its combat units, and it will make it a lot easier when we start this major offensive. So everything that we're seeing right now, it seems that they are definitely leading up to a major offensive, getting everything in order, training the soldiers, getting the lethal weapons into Ukraine. Everything is all coming together. All the pieces are starting to fit, and we're starting to realize that, yes, this is where we are headed. Now, the United States government central bankers, they continually give Russia, China, any other nation, Iran, Syria, always ultimatums. It's black and white. You must do this or else. And right now, Putin is out there, and he's saying that the United States is trying to tell Russia what it should do by meddling in its domestic political process, including the use of financing in non-governmental sector and imposing international security. Putin is saying, let us define our own interests and our own needs based on our own history and our own culture. Well, this is what the United States government central bankers do. They go into a country, they remove the elected government, and they dictate what they need to do at this time. This is what they did in Libya, Yemen, Lebanon, Iraq, Ukraine, and many other countries. And Russia's saying, you're not going to do this to us right now. We will decide what we're going to do. We understand that Russia continually has the food ban with Europe, and they're not going to be adding any more food to the list of food that is banned right now. They're saying it's not necessary. They do not have to do this. And we can see that Obama is out there saying that they're going to be placing more sanctions on Russia. And Putin is taking an opposite approach, which is very interesting. He's saying that to respond to Western sanctions, they're going to do this with greater economic freedom and openness. The country's economy hasn't seen any deep crisis. On the contrary, they have gotten through all the hardships and the country is doing well. He says we are going to respond to foreign restrictions, not by shutting the gateway to our economy, but with greater freedom and openness. This is not a fine catchphrase, but the content of our real policy of the work that we have been conducting for the sake of creating conditions for doing business and identifying new partners, new markets, and participating in major integration projects. We are ready to work with anyone who is willing to cooperate on the basis of equality and mutual respect. And this is exactly what Russia and China are doing. They're going out and they're making deals around the world. And they're taking the opposite approach of what the United States government central bankers are doing. They are making war. They are using force. They don't have countries on the same playing field. They want to dictate what they want done, because this is what happens when an entire system is crumbling and falling apart. You're trying to keep everything the way it is and expand the empire, and they're having trouble doing this. And the only way they know how to do it at this point is with force. And this is exactly what we're seeing. Now, we understand that Russia and the United States, they have a treaty between them, the ABM Treaty, and it was created to avoid a strategic imbalance. But Washington withdrew from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, signed with the former Soviet Union in 1972, that was aimed at limiting the number of and capabilities of both countries at their ABM sites. Following the move, Washington significantly expanded the development and the number of missile defense systems in Central and Eastern Europe. According to the Vice Chairman of U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral James Winfeld, the United States will install the Aegis Ashore ballistic missile defense system in Romania, completing Phase 2 of the European Phased Adaptive Approach by the end of 2015. So the United States government central bankers have no problem breaking treaties. They are placing ballistic missiles in Eastern Europe, and there are more on the way. And you know what Russia is going to do to respond to this. They have to protect themselves, so they're going to set up their own missile system. But who is initiating all of this? it is the United States government central bankers. But of course, when it comes out in the corporate media, all you will see is that Russia or China are putting missiles pointing to the United States. They will not talk about how the United States put them there first, pointing towards Russia. And this is going to be a huge problem. And we see other countries building up their armed forces. Canada is actually building up their military at this point. Canada has made it drastically harder to apply for citizenship. And it seems that Canada right now is trying to build up their military. All of a sudden, they are now creating a fast track if you serve in the military after increasing the time requirement by 50%. Canada never beefed up its military. This is a clearly total change in direction. Do they believe or do they know that war is coming? I think they do. I think all of these countries do. I think Europe understands it, and they're nervous because the central banking system is pushing for war. They know this entire system is falling apart, crumbling apart, and they are definitely getting ready. Now, out in the Middle East, specifically Yemen, we see things are completely breaking down. The talks, the peace talks, the ceasefire agreement, not going anywhere. The exiled president is saying that, listen, we gave them an ultimatum and they didn't take it, because that's really what they were giving them. So the whole entire peace talks broke down. They've reached no agreement whatsoever. And we see right now that the Houthis are bringing Saudi Arabia up on charges because they are using banned weapons in the country. They are using white phosphorus. And this is scorching hot phosphorus that falls from the sky. It burns right through your skin, and it is very, very deadly, and it really is devastating when it hits the body. And we're seeing that anytime the United States government central bankers are behind some type of proxy war, trying to replace the government or put back the puppet government, they always seem to use banned weapons. If we look in Ukraine, the southeastern people also were reporting that the Kiev government was using white phosphorus. In Gaza, we see Israel, they were using white phosphorus, and this is a banned weapon. And we see that the United States government central bankers, they really don't care as long as they get their way. They just blame it on somebody else. Oh no, well, Saudi Arabia is using it, it's not us. Well, they are the puppeteers. They're the ones who are controlling everything. They're controlling everything in Kiev. So they have knowledge of what is going on. Now, what's very interesting, and we saw this back in August of 2013, and I'm seeing the same exact signs once again. Saudi Arabia is going to meet with Putin to offer him a deal that he cannot refuse, basically a bribe. Now, why are they doing this? Because they want Putin to back off of Assad. They want to say, okay, I'll accept this deal, you can have Syria. Now, back in August, I did a report, which was episode 131, where at the time, Saudi Arabia made an offer to Putin to move away from Assad, to let them have Syria. What was this offer that they made? Well, they were going to give them a huge arms deal. This was back in 2013. They were going to buy arms from Russia, give them a little extra bonus of extra cash on the side if Putin moved away from Assad and let them take over the country. Well, today, Saudi Arabia is up to the same exact tactic. It is reported that Saudi Arabia has sent a delegation to Moscow for the purpose of once again attempting to lure Russia away from its current interest in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia offered Russia a secret oil deal if it drops Syria. Saudi Arabia has secretly offered Russia a sweeping deal to control the global oil market and safeguard Russia's gas contracts if the Kremlin backs away from Assad in Syria. It also stated, and this seems like a threat to me, coming from the prince, pledged to safeguard Russia's naval base in Syria if the Assad regime is toppled. But he also hinted that the Chechens operating in Syria were a pressure tool that could be switched on and off. So this is very interesting that they're using this tactic once again. We saw it happen before. This happened during the summer months, and here we are in the summer months once again. We see John Kerry is out there pushing the chemical attacks using chlorine, blaming it on Assad, mounting the evidence, having a doctor testify. They're building up the propaganda, trying to get President Putin to step aside to go after Assad. We're seeing the same thing occur because they are getting ready for a major offensive. Now we see the FBI Director, James Comey, he is out there once again saying that there are thousands of people in the United States joining the Islamic State. We just can't control them. And they're all joining because of social media. And we just don't have the ability because of all this encryption once again. And we can see this is not about the Islamic State. This is not about people joining the Islamic State. This is about encryption because they want to spy on the American people and they don't want people using encryption. They don't want companies implementing encryption where they don't have the method and the key. And this is why they're continually making the case and trying to show that thousands upon thousands of people on Twitter and other social media accounts and other ways they're using encryption to block us from spying on them and we can't stop it. There's just no way. Well, this is the way it needs to be because they should have no right to spy on the American people. And out of all the cases that we see, all these people join the Islamic State, it's because the FBI set the patsies up. They set them up. They pushed them, maneuvered them into doing things. And they always find those people who maybe were in jail, that have a criminal record, have a drug problem. And they always find these people to convince them to do things they normally wouldn't do. And they orchestrate all of it. And every time the evidence comes out, most of these cases are completely dropped because they have no proof. They didn't do anything. And again, if somebody is looking, if you believe them, is looking at the Islamic State, it doesn't mean you can arrest them. They didn't do anything. But again, as we know, this is a proxy army. And this is really a way of trying to convince everyone that this is going to be a major problem. Now, everyone needs to protect themselves by using their own encryption or using encryption methods or using other products. I mean, Block It Pocket is one where it's a little sleeve. You can slip your phone into it. They won't track you because it blocks the signal because the material's interwoven with copper, stainless steel, silver, and it blocks the signal. It also has another benefit where it blocks the radiation from going into your head because, as we know, these cell phones do emit radiation. And you can find that on blockitpocket.com. They have many different things on there. One of them, which is very nice, is that you can slip your credit cards into them and it blocks the signal. So when you walk by people that have these transmitters, they aren't able to steal the information off the chip because each one of these credit cards now or debit cards are going to have these chips and it will block the signal so they can't get to it. And this will also help you because when the license come out with the RFID chip, it will also block that signal so they can't track you and they won't know where you're going. So it is actually beneficial to have something like this because, again, we have to take matters into our own hand. Because just like you lock up your jewelry, just like you lock up your home, just like you secure your mail, you seal your envelope, you don't leave it open when you send the mail, you seal it because you want privacy. The same thing has to go with your email. The same thing has to go with your tweets. The same thing has to go with your texts and the information on your computer. And you want to keep things secure. You don't want to be tracked. And I think we all want the same thing. We want privacy. And the founding fathers wanted all of us to have privacy, and this is why they made this into the framework of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, so we can have privacy, so we have certain freedoms, separate and apart from the government, where they cannot just come into our homes, where they just can't spy on our personal information. Now, out in Charleston, we see the corporate media is out there. They're pushing gun control. They're pushing everything they possibly can. Hate crime, racist. This is a race crime. It's race wars that are building up. They're doing whatever they can to push their agenda. Now, there's many different agendas associated with this, as we know. And what we're seeing right now is that all these mass shootings seem to have something in common. That these individuals are on some type of psychotropic drug, where they're taking Prozac or any other type of medication. I mean, if we look throughout history, like Jeff Weiss, age 16, he was prescribed 60 milligrams of Prozac, and he shot his grandfather and his grandfather's girlfriend. And then he shot himself. So there ended up that being 10 dead, 12 wounded after he was done. We see Corey Battisgard, age 16, Washington State High School. He was on Paxil. He said it caused him to hallucinate. He took his rifle to high school and held 23 classmates hostages. He has no memory of the event. Chris Fetters, age 13, killed his favorite aunt while taking Prozac. Christopher Pittman, age 12, murdered both his grandparents while taking Zoloft. And it goes on and on and on. And we see this Charleston shooter, Dylann Roof. He was arrested February 28th in a mall. And he was, at the time, taking a medication called, Suboxone. And this was to treat an opiate addiction. And of course, this drug has side effects: agitation, hostility, hallucinations, suicide tendencies. And when you withdraw from this drug, guess what? There's rage. There's things you do that you normally wouldn't do. And we're starting to see that a lot of these instances all lead back to these type of medications. Now, this doesn't mean that the government didn't step in and persuade this person, because they normally go to those people that are on these type of drugs because they are mentally impaired in some way and they need these drugs to get by every day. They understand that. He was arrested before. They knew who he was. And he might have been pushed to do something to push certain agendas. And this is what we're starting to see, because all of this makes no sense in what he did. An everyday person will not follow these steps. And what he said in the church seems a little scripted. His Facebook was set up this year, and a lot of the followers were not all white. A lot of them were of many different backgrounds, so that didn't make sense. He had 2 entries in his Facebook. And a lot of this that we're seeing right now is to push certain agendas. And of course, as soon as this was ended, the president came out and he was looking for gun control. He's saying that this needs to be stopped. And again, the person went into a church, and under the South Carolina law, weapons are not permitted unless the establishment gives permission. So he knew there would be no weapons in this church. It's very convenient. And we see that this is always being used for certain agendas. And the president was out there saying that this is a terrible, horrific event, which it is. I mean, this is terrible that people do die. And even if there is a false flag, you have to remember, people will die in a false flag. They're not all actors. People will get hurt. And we see that almost all of these events occur in gun-free areas. Very interesting. And he's saying that, we need to implement more gun laws. We need to stop this from happening. That people with guns are not going to stop this. Well, he's actually not correct with this, because we see that armed civilians have actually prevented several mass shootings from occurring, and some of them in churches. This past New Year's, Florida pastor prevented a possible mass shooting at his church and saved the lives of several men, women, and children when he used his firearm to incapacitate the shooter. In the president's home city in Chicago, Uber driver used his concealed firearm this year to stop a gunman who was firing into a crowd of people. The assistant state's attorney, Barry Quinn, praised the Uber driver for using his weapon for self-defense. In March, police credited a concealed carrier with saving several lives, including those of children, in a Philadelphia barbershop. And the list goes on and on and on. But what's funny? The corporate media never reports on this whatsoever. They just leave all that out. And again, we need to go back to the cause of why this is happening. Back to the government agencies. Back to the prescription medication. Again, if he didn't have a gun, he might have used a knife. He might have used a bomb. Just like someone who drives drunk. It's not the car. It's the person who's taking the alcoholic beverage. The same thing that's happening now. It's the government setting these people up, and in some instances, it is the prescription medication. And some of them, it's combined. But we see there are gun rights supporters out there calling for more concealed carry in the churches at this time. And again, if you look in those areas where there are guns and people are carrying, we don't see this. It's amazing that we only see these mass shootings occurring in gun-free zones. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.